Okay, so we find ourselves um, in Judges now, and to give you a little bit of overview of what we kind of know, um, the author of Judges is unknown. So unlike the books that we've dealt with previously, with Genesis through Deuteronomy being almost certainly Moses, and Joshua being written by Joshua near the end of his life. The book of Judges, we don't know who the author is, but one of the probably more likely candidates is Samuel. Okay, we know that. So we know that part of the discussion of Judges is discussing of what led Israel to a king. That is certainly an element in all of this, because remember that the culmination here is this: that God had told them that he was their king. And so instead of them having a king, judges that were like local rulers, really more along the lines of a judicial presence. However, what you find out in Judges and really throughout, okay, Moses would have technically been a judge. Same thing with, okay. Now they led all the tribes through those period of times. Well, but once the tribes kind of went back to their land, then they more locally governed. And each of the tribes was kind of its own entity. They were together, but there wasn't a centralized government system. And so that's important to understand as we deal with this, because as we look at each of the judges, they are each over a small area. I'm not talking about all of Israel each time. It's a picture. Okay. So that is important. One of the things that this particular study mentions is that I don't know that I agree with that. It is certainly the second one, though. It's a record of Israel's sin cycle under the judges. Okay. And that will actually be what we spend most of the time on. I'm not going to go into a lot of the individual judges. It's just not, that's not necessarily a need. But in chapter 2, there is a cycle that is given that gives us the entire cycle of the book. And that's kind of the thing that you kind of need to understand most of all. The key verse of the book is Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Okay. Now, I want to take a minute here because it's important that we understand what this is really saying. There are those that would say, well, of course, they hadn't started the monarchy yet, which is true. This may also be the reason that they say, well, it's a defense for David, King David. But I believe that's what this means. What this means is fairly simple. If God is to be their king, remember that is a foundational element to Israel. In fact, back in Deuteronomy, there is a place in Deuteronomy chapter 17 where God says, okay, so when you move to a monarch, here is how they're supposed to act. Here's the criteria over all of Israel, but I am your king. For example, Deuteronomy 17 tells us that the kings of Israel, their very, very first act as king of Israel was to be that they were to go into the temple. They were to get with the priests in the temple, and the priests were to give them a copy of the law of Moses, okay, or of the scripture at the time, mainly the law, so Genesis through Deuteronomy. The king was then to hand copy the entire thing. So in his own handwriting, he was to write a copy of the law of Moses for himself, with the priests checking his work to make sure it was right, or something like that. Okay. But imagine Genesis through Deuteronomy, even if it's just those 5 books, imagine the length of those 5 books and handwriting it in its entirety. Okay. Then that was to be their own personal copy of the law. And the way Deuteronomy puts it is they are to read it every day, morning and night, and hide it in their hearts so that they don't idea. You are now the king over Israel, but I want you to have a full knowledge of what is expected of you by your king. Because God is still the king, you are the under king. Okay, that is a major discussion within the law. In Judges, we see this cycle of sinfulness, and we really are going to get to a point, we'll talk about it before we're done, that we see something happen in a story that got Sodom and Gomorrah blown off the face of the earth in Israel. And then it kind of finishes with these words: in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So what does it mean? They weren't allowing God to be king. They weren't allowing God to direct them. They weren't allowing God to be ruler over them. Instead, they just all did what they wanted. If we were being honest, it's kind of a discussion of what. Let's move into the actual book here. So, chapter 1. Chapter 1 begins the discussion of the continuing conquest of Canaan. So what we have is Joshua has died, okay, and the Israel inquires of the Lord. So what typically this means is they asked him to use the Urim and the Thummim, which was a special thing that the priests had. It's just called the Urim and Thummim. But it was a means by which they could determine the will of God. And they said, so who's the next tribe who needs to go and fight their enemies and take their land? And it says, the Lord responds, Judah shall go. So Judah goes. He gets Simeon, his brother, and says, come with me and let's take it out. So they go and they take the rest of their. So what has happened is that there are still some of the local tribes and some of the Canaanite groups that are still living in the land. God hasn't given them all of it yet. So Joshua's died. Remember, they were given rest for the rest of Joshua's life. Now that Joshua's died, he says, now you need to go take the rest. So Judah goes and takes them. We have Caleb. So we have Othniel, who is the son of Caleb's younger brother. Now, who's Caleb? He's the one who was one of the 2 spies he gets his nephew to go and take a bunch of land that was part of their. So we see this taking of the land. Then we see Ephraim. Sorry, make sure that I'm right in how this. Yeah, the house of Joseph. So we're talking about, okay, they go and take their property. So we see 2 of the tribes go and take the rest of the land they're supposed to. Then in verse 27, we see that a bunch of the other tribes are disobedient. So it says Manasseh, which is one of the other sons of Joseph. Remember, they had a bunch of land on the eastern side of the Jordan, and they have a little bit on the western side. They didn't drive out the people. They eventually put the Canaanites to forced labor. They made them slaves, but they didn't kill them. Then Ephraim didn't take out all of theirs. Zebulun didn't drive out all of the inhabitants. Asher didn't drive out all of the inhabitants. Naphtali didn't drive out all the inhabitants. Okay. And then the last one is interesting. So Dan, if you ever look at a map of the promised land, you will see that in the promise, Dan is supposed to be the far northern tribe. But a lot of the later maps, you will find Dan down further south. Reason is because they didn't take out their people. And so the people, the Amorites, the Canaanites that were left, they didn't drive them out. So the Canaanites drove them out. And they had to find another place to live.
Are all those little tribes considered to be Canaanites also?
So it's, yeah. Yes. So yeah.
They're all Canaanites.
Yes. So remember, Canaan is the entirety of the country. And there's a bunch of little tribes. Now, they would have all been the children of, and this is an important understanding to get into. These would have all been the children of Noah's son, Ham. Because we see, remember there's the story after the flood that Noah gets drunk and he's naked in the tent, and his son Ham comes in and sees him naked and goes and gets his brothers, and his brothers go, oh, we don't want to see dad naked. So they walk in, faced away, and cover him. And then Noah is pretty harsh with his son. Well, he's later renamed Canaan. Well, the Canaanites would have been that group. Okay. What we see go on is that later, and we're talking hundreds of years later, Abram comes into the land of the Canaanites, which would have been this group of descendants, because all the Jews, and let's get into this too, the Muslim groups that we talk about today are all what we call Semitic people. They're children of Shem. Okay, so they're from the different group of the sons of Noah. Well, he comes in. Well, the Canaanites have fallen deeply, deeply into idolatry. Okay, they are sacrificing their children. They are doing all sorts of terrible things. Okay, God gives that land to the children of Israel, but we're 400 years before that event. We see a point, a few generations, I'm going to send your children out of this land again, Abraham, and I'm going to send them into slavery in a foreign land. And he says, the reason I'm going to do that is so that the sin of the Canaanites will come to completion. So it's really while it's slavery for the Jews, it's a time of mercy for the Canaanites to give them an opportunity to turn. But they don't. So then when the children of Israel, 440 something years later, come back, this people that live in Canaan are in the same spiritual condition that Sodom and Gomorrah were in, that they have exhausted their chance. They have completely trampled on God's mercy, and now he says, you just wipe them out. But they didn't do it. Okay, so we come to chapter 2, and then we see this statement. It says, now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. I do want to bring up the discussion of the one exception. Okay, I said we have 400 and something years. So their sin has come to completion, and they are now, it is now righteous for them to be destroyed. However, we do see two groups, or one person and a group of people, that escape that, because even as the children of Israel come in, they turn to the Lord. The first one is Rahab. Remember, she's a Canaanite. And her and her family are the sole survivors of Jericho. Because why? Because she took in the spies and she made covenant with the spies for their God to protect her. Then oh my gosh, my brain just shut down. Hold on. The Gibeonites. Thank you. Okay. Remember that the Gibeonites, and they use subterfuge. They kind of cheat to do this, but they go and make covenant with Israel, pretending that they live a long way off, but they make covenant with Israel and Israel's God, which brings them, as weird as it sounds, even though they were dishonest in this establishing of the covenant was still binding. And so the Gibeonites don't fall into this curse of you didn't do what you were supposed to, even though Israel accepting a covenant from the Gibeonites was not what God, or was not what he had told them to do. It omits very clearly that they ever asked God whether they should make the covenant. Oh, we want a covenant with you. And Joshua and the elders go, sure. And then find out later that they'd been deceived. But God still honored the covenant. So that is not, these two groups are not part of this. This is a group that has continued to live in their own way. They have continued to follow the idols that they were following. They've continued to do wickedness and failed to be obedient and do what God told them to do. So the angel comes and says, you didn't do what I told you. And he says, so here's what's going to happen. I'm no longer going to drive them out. When I told you to drive them out, and I would have driven them out before you, you weren't obedient. So now I'm not going to do it anymore. And they are going to become a thorn for you.
So you allow me to live together in society.
And they're going to become a reason that you struggle to obey. Their idols are going to cause you to be a snare. They are going to become issues for you. Okay. And it says, as soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words, all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And it says they called the name of the place Bochim, and they sacrificed to the Lord. Okay. So they repented, but yet God did not change his mind. Now, here we come to the very, very important element that comes on. Okay. Because verse 6 actually moves us back in time a little bit, because this is at the end of Joshua's life. This is before his death. When Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his own inheritance and took possession of his land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen the great work that God had done for Israel. Okay, so here's the idea. Joshua, we don't know exactly how old he is when we finish the story of Joshua, but there's a little bit of time here. Joshua lives to the age of 110 and he dies. But there are some of the elders of Israel who outlived him. So they would have been younger men when they crossed the Jordan, and they would have lived longer. So all the days of Joshua and all those that saw the conquest. So we're almost back to this same kind of thing that happened when we were talking about the leaving of Egypt, right? We have a generation that saw the crossing of the Red Sea. They don't get to enter into the promised land because they were disobedient. Then we have another group that the water crossing miracles they saw was the Jordan. And they come in and they take the land, and they are faithful to serve God all the days of the life of the leaders during that time. But then we come in verse 11 that Joshua dies, these elders die, And then it says, and another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So what we have is we have a failure of Deuteronomy chapter 6. You will teach these things to your children. You'll talk about them when you're going along, when you're sitting down, when you're eating, when you're doing, okay. They had failed to really teach them what this meant, is kind of the idea. They've forgotten. Remember the whole discussion when we were talking about Deuteronomy of how important remember was in Deuteronomy? They've forgotten. So now we are going to see the cycle of the entire book of Judges. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods and from among the gods of the peoples who are around them, and they bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them. And they were in terrible distress. So, step one, they serve the Baals, and God punishes them. Okay? What? So the Baals are pagan gods. Now, there are particulars that are called Baal, so-and-so, Baal, okay? But if you really want to go in, it's typically, he's just talking about pagan gods, but when you talk about Baal overall, it is a weather god in the pantheon, a lot of these. In fact, if you really study Greek mythology, Zeus is a Baal. And you actually see that word in the terminology. Okay, so each of them had a kind of a local pantheon, but usually there was this head god of the weather who was called Baal. Okay, but what it's getting to in the plural is they are serving pagan gods. Okay, so step two, they're in distress, so they call out to God. Why are we in trouble like this? And they call out to God, oh God, we're sorry. We shouldn't have done this. It's bad. It's really bad. So then the Lord would raise up a judge, save them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Okay. So what happens is they come to a point. So they would come to a point where they would call on the Lord to save them. So God would raise up a judge. The judge would deliver them out of the hands of the enemy. And then it says, so whenever the Lord, this verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, so now we're at step 3. The judge died, they would turn back to the Baals. And the cycle would repeat. Okay. I once heard it this way, and I thought it was a very good way of explaining this. The book of Judges is like a giant toilet bowl that has just been flushed. Because you just see this circle as they are flowing down the drain. Okay? Notice, they disobey. God turns them over to enemies. They cry out. God raises up a judge. The judge delivers them. They follow the Lord for a little while the judge is alive. The judge dies. They forget about the Lord again, and here we go again. By the time we get to the end, all of these things are not there. Like the deliverance isn't total, some of those type of things. And we get to a point where the judges aren't very good people either. So what are we watching? And well, the important nation who is chosen that they are not going to remain firm with the Lord. And let's be fair. I want you to see the picture in our own world. The catastrophe of 9/11, what happened for 2 months?
Like turn back to God.
Turn back to God, right? For about 60 days.
I was gonna say 2 weeks.
Yeah, I didn't think it lasted that.
Okay. But, I mean, the churches were full for 2 weeks. I mean, pray, pray, pray. And what happens? We forget.
Yes, that bullet, so, yeah.
And the trick here, and this is very important, is each time around they're a little farther down in their disobedience. Okay? So, Lord is moved. He raises up a judge to save them. Then they turn away again. Okay? And so it really comes to the point, and it says at the end of chapter 2, because this people have not obeyed my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them. So they become a test. Will you stay faithful? Whether they will take care to walk in the way or not. Okay, he didn't give them into the hands of Israel anymore. So then chapter 3 goes in. We're not going to do a lot in here. But the Lord goes in. It says, here are the nations that were left. Understand the Philistines in particular that you see there in verse 3 are not Canaanite people. They are a group probably from North Africa that formed a little settlement along the western coast of Israel.
And that's the Philistines.
Yes. Okay. But they become the primary antagonist for Israel for the rest of their history. Okay. Now, we come in and we see the first judge. Okay. So the first judge is someone we saw in chapter 1. It's Caleb's nephew, Othniel. And it says, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. Step 1. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of Mesopotamia. Step 2. The people served 8 years under him. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, step 3, the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel and saved them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of Mesopotamia, into his hands, and his hand prevailed over him. So the land had rest for 40 years. Step 4. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Verse 12. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Step 1.
Isn't this redundant? I mean,
It is absolutely redundant.
you do it.
Okay.
We need to stop.
Now, I'm not going to read through all of this, but the other thing that you will find out very quickly about the book of Judges is it is a thing to tell you that if the book of Judges was made into the movie, it would be rated R due to gore. The next judge is named Ehud. This is a very fun story because the king of the enemy that God gave them over to was apparently very, very fat. That is exactly how it says it. And Ehud acts as an assassin. He's left-handed. And he makes himself a short sword that does not have a hilt guard. And he hides it on his right thigh. He finds... he goes into the king while he is in the bath or in the bathroom or it's something to that level and stabs him. And the Bible says, these are exactly the words, it says, and Ehud stabbed him in the gut and the rolls of fat rolled over the hilt of the sword so that he couldn't pull the sword out. And So I mean, like,
What verse is that?
let me find.
22.
So verse 22, and the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and he lost his. Okay, so that is literally the scriptural discussion of this. But then we have Ehud gives them peace for 80 years. Okay, then we have a couple of we have a very minor judge named Shamgar. He gets one verse. Okay, then in chapter 4 we have Barak. Barak is called to be a judge, but he's unwilling to really do what God wants. So God raised up a woman by the name of Deborah to be his helper. And at this point, we have the enemy of Israel is running away from them. He stops and goes to bed in a tent of a woman, and then she takes one of the pegs for the tent and pegs him to the floor. Once again, fairly brutal.
No blood and gore there.
So then verse 5, we have a song of praise from Deborah and Barak. Okay.
So Deborah was a judge too.
Deborah is technically a judge.
What verse is that?
Chapter 4.
Uh-huh.
So we have technically Barak is the judge. Deborah's a prophetess if you look at verse 4 of chapter 4. Okay, she summons Barak and says, you've been called to be a judge. And he goes, well, not unless you go with me. Okay, so then Deborah says, okay, I'll go with you, but I want you to know, because you wouldn't do it yourself, someone else is going to take your prize. And it's this woman who tent pegs him to the floor through his temple. So that is literally puts a tent peg right here and nails him to the ground. That is verse 21. Okay. So then we have a period of peace. So once again, we go through this same thing. Then as we go forward, we have Midian. Then we have the story of Gideon, which is kind of the longest of the judge stories. Gideon is one of my favorite stories because Gideon is hiding, threshing grain inside a wine press, which is not really a good place to thresh grain because he's scared. And the first words the angel says is, "Oh, mighty man of valor." Okay. All evidence to the contrary. Gideon asks for like four different proofs that God is really calling him. And then and God goes, "Nope, your arm's too big," and cuts about half of his army. And then God goes, "Nope, your army's still too big," and cuts another half of his army down to 300. God gives him a victory. Okay. Which is all great. But then at the very end of the story of Gideon, he gets too big for his britches and thinks of himself like a priest. So he becomes unfaithful to God by becoming prideful and thinking that he's bigger than everybody else, and actually tries to make himself king. Tries to make it where his kids after him would become leader, which is a king thing. Okay. Then as we go forward, we have once again they disobey. They do all the stupid stuff again. So we have a couple more judges come around. We come to chapter 11 and find Jephthah, and he becomes a judge and does things. Jephthah as a judge there's another one of these stories. Jephthah makes a very foolish vow. He tells the Lord, comes out of my front door when I get home, thinking it'll be an animal, and his daughter walks out. A foolish vow. Now, the funny part of that is there is a part in the law of Moses that says if you make a foolish vow, here's how you get out of it. But he doesn't do that. So she gets 2 months and then he kills her. The tragedy story. So then we have another, then we come to chapter 13 and we have the story of Samson. Okay, now here is one of those areas where I said that some of the elements fall apart. Samson does not actually win complete freedom for his people. Now, the reason for that is because Samson can't keep his life straight. Okay, we find out at the beginning of the story of Samson that Samson Samson's mother is told he is to be a Nazirite from birth. Okay, now a Nazirite vow is a vow that was made to the Lord for a specific length of time, typically. And when you were in the midst of a Nazirite vow, there were 3 things that you could not do. So we want to make sure we understand. You have vowed to separate yourself to service to the Lord. You are not allowed to drink anything that came from the grape. So no wine, it is not in whether it was anything fermented or just wine okay. So there are a couple things you need to understand. That at this point in history, there would have been 2 forms of alcoholic beverage. There would have been beer and there would have been wine. Distilling was not something they would have done at this point. But you couldn't have wine at all. You could not go near a dead body. So that included, like if you were in the midst of your Nazirite vow and your father died, you couldn't go to the funeral because you made a vow to the Lord. And 3, you couldn't cut your hair. Okay. So, notice that this is how it says. He's a Danite, and it says, therefore be careful, drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. The razor shall not, no razor shall come upon his head, for he shall be a Nazirite to God from birth. Okay. Those are the things. As we go through the story of Samson, we watch him break all of those rules. Okay. First of all, he is traveling to, I think a wedding is what he's traveling to. And he sees the corpse of a lion with a bee's nest inside of it. And he goes he kills a lion. And later he comes back upon the corpse of the lion and there's a honeycomb in this lion carcass and he eats honey. Kind of gross. But so let's make sure we understand. He has broken an element of his Nazirite clean before God if you touched a corpse. Okay, so then we find multiple times of him drinking. We see him getting drunk. We see all of this alcohol in his life. And we just have to assume that some of it was wine. Okay. But yet what happens is over and over again, by the way, the ultimate problem for Samson was women. He had a real issue with women. Okay. He finds a foreign woman, so a non-Jewish woman. She's a Philistine woman, says, oh, I want to marry her. And his parents go, no, you're not allowed to marry outside the children of Israel. Oh, no, I'm going to do it. Well, in the course of that, it causes strife between him and the Philistines, and they come to kill him. And it would say the Spirit of the Lord comes, murders a whole bunch of Philistines. Okay. Then so we have all of these things that go on. We see him win battle after battle after battle as God works through him, despite the fact that he is not being faithful to what God has told him to do. Then in chapter 16, we come to the story of Samson and Delilah. And we finally come to the point that he cannot resist this woman to the point that he tells her about his hair. Even though twice before, now I want you to understand the stupidity of this. She goes, "What makes you so strong, Samson?" Well, and he tells her a lie. And he breaks free and kills a bunch of them. Then, why won't you tell me what your secret is, Samson? Oh, you mean that wasn't because of you the Philistine showed up? So he tells her another lie, but it's closer to the truth this time. She does that to him too. The Philistines show up. He breaks free, kills a bunch of the Philistines, and goes on. And finally, she nags him so much
They gave him enough wine.
that he tells him, "Well, I can't cut my hair." So she then, "Hey, the Philistines are here again." Oh, big surprise. And this time his strength is gone. So they take him, they put him in irons, they gouge out his eyes, and they put him into slavery in the temple, basically in prison, but that. So then we come to this point where, and it says at the end, or at verse 22 of chapter 16, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it. So then we come to the end of 16, and this is really important to get to. It says, "Now the Lord," this is verse 23. "Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, 'Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands.' And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, 'Our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who's killed many of us.' And when their hearts were merry, they said, 'Call Samson that he may entertain us.' So they bring Samson out of prison and they chain him up between two pillars. Remember, his eyes are gone, he can't see. So they basically set him where he's standing against two pillars. And it says that Samson finally prays to God. He says, "Oh Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, oh God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my eyes." And he grabs the pillars and he's given strength again, and he tears the temple down and kills more in his death than he did in his entire life. But remember that it is not really, they are not given full freedom. They are not completely brought out of slavery under the Philistines. He judged for 20 years. So his entire career was 20 years. Now, when we move to chapter 17, I'm not going to read this. This is the most grotesque idea ever. So there's a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name is Micah. Okay.
So is he an Israelite?
He's an Israelite. He's a child of Ephraim. Okay. I'm sorry. Let me make sure that is not, no. So we have this, but then, okay. So he has Levite make him an idol. So understand, this is how bad it's gotten. They are asking the people who are supposed to be in charge of worship in Israel to make them idols. Okay. So there's first. So the idolatry and all of that that's going on. Chapter 19 then comes, and this is actually the really grotesque story. I'm sorry. So there's another Levite, and he's traveling through the hill country of Ephraim, and he has with him a concubine. Okay. Not his wife, but a lady. And he comes to stay in one of the towns of Ephraim, and the people of the town do with him and her what the men of Sodom and Gomorrah tried to do to the two angels. And they end up raping this woman multiple times and killing her. Okay. So, hold on, I've got to find exactly where it is. They sat down, drank together, please, and instead let your heart be merry. When the men rose up to go, sorry?
like 25.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gibeah's crime. Here we are. So, 22. And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master, bring out the man who came into your house that we may know him. So, understand that what they are asking for is for homosexual relations. They're wanting to rape him. So instead, they send out the woman, and she's violated, and basically, okay. So, so he cuts her into pieces and sends her all over Israel as a sign of how bad this group Benjamin had been. Okay, they kill a bunch of people. Okay, kill a bunch of the tribes of Benjamin, and they make a statement saying, none of our daughters will ever marry any of the people of Benjamin again. Okay. So then we come to a point where they realize, they realize that Benjamin is going to die out, so they have to go all throughout Israel to find a group of men who were not there when they made this vow, so that they could give women to Benjamin so that Benjamin wouldn't die out. It's just grotesque, this whole story. Okay? So what we have is we have them in the absolute depths of depravity. They are absolutely not following God. They are absolutely not doing what God had told them to do. They are completely abandoning the law of Moses and just doing whatever they want at this point. And then the very last book of the book of Judges comes in and says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this last verse, this key verse of the entire book, is basically telling us what the state of Israel is in at this point. Now, I'm going to make sure I bring this up because it's important that we understand this. Is the end of Judges, so the next book in our Bible and the one that we will look at next week is Ruth. The book of Ruth takes place in the midst of all of this garbage. Okay, so there's an important purpose that we're going to see as we look at it, is that even in all of this garbage, God is still moving. But what we're going to see happen is the next book, kind of in chronological order, is going to be 1 Samuel, which begins by God raising up another judge. And he raises up Samuel. And Samuel is a priest and a judge. But Samuel is also, and the very, very important thing we have to understand with Samuel is that Samuel is a priest, he's a judge, and he's a kingmaker. Okay? He is the one who anoints the first two kings of Israel. Okay? And we're going to see that movement as we go forward. Samuel is a movement back to the Lord in the midst of all of the garbage that they're in. Okay? And so we'll see that as we move forward. But for next week, we'll be in Ruth. And Ruth is really a good story and not nearly as down, it's not nearly as depressing as this one. So any questions? I know there's a lot. I know we went through a lot very, very fast. I didn't necessarily want to go through every judge. It's just not.
Do you know how many judges there were?
In total, I think there were 9, but I'm not sure. Let me look it up.
That's okay. That's fine.
And they were also generals, right? I guess. Okay.
I would think I would be able to tell you, but sometimes
That's
there
okay.
are 12.
A lot of that kind of
Um,
reminds me of some of the people today.
Yeah.
See, here we're doing it.
So Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. Technically, that's in Judges. Technically, there's a 13 in Samuel. Samuel's the 13th and last. And I will say, this is probably not all the judges. These are just the ones that are named. But like I said, this one, it's hard to not say this. Judges may be the most depressing book in the Bible.
It sounds like
Um,
it.
Just because we are watching I mean, I don't know. You could make the case that First Kings and Second Kings come close. But I mean, you are watching a nation implode because they won't follow God.
And how far they turn from him.
Oh my word. Yes.
As many times.
And like I said, remember that this story about Gibeah is the exact thing that we see in Genesis when the angels walk into Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're going, that's happening in Israel.
Where's Gibeah?
Gibeah is in the tribe of Benjamin, so it's in the southern part of Israel.
Well, I guess it's easier to take them all at once and then bunch up that way.
I mean, it's just crazy. But what we watch just over and over again, and it's going to be the theme that we run through, unfortunately, through a large part of the Old Testament, is they would not remain faithful. They would constantly forget all that God had done for them and turn to other gods. And we just see this, it's very brutal to watch how this works. Now, the sad thing is we really can't say much because we do the same thing. It may not look the same way, but we do the same thing. We forget God and we go searching after wealth. We go searching after power. We go searching after pleasure. We go searching after whatever it might be. You name it, we chase it.
And when you go off in that direction there, yeah.
But we just see this brutal level of disobedience. And we see God go, okay, but you're going to get punished for it.
And people always do the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they did apparently a long time ago too.
Oh, yes.
So we're.
All right. So that ends Judges. We finished on time. I can't believe it.
Right.
It's a miracle.